Daily Detroit is brought to you by the community. Support our work at patreon.com/dailydetroit.
It's Wednesday, Thanksgiving Eve, the biggest bar night of the year, and this is your Daily Detroit for November 27th. I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jared Stays. So Sven, welcome back, man.
Hey, thank you very much. So nice to be back home here in the Motor City.
All right, well, listen, a lot happened while you were gone, and we will get to some of that later, but first, man, you are fresh off the plane from Minsk, Belarus. How was that, man?
Oh, wow, what a trip. I consider myself so fortunate to have gone. Minsk is a fantastic place to visit. I had a wonderful time, and what an interesting place it is.
Well, and I think we should outline for people, you were not going there on vacation.
No, it was not a vacation, kind of a working trip, although I had time to be sort of a sightseer, and I went and saw a couple old castles, which was neat, and went to the city's World War II museum, which was really fascinating. But no, I was there at invitation from the Press Club Belarus, which is an organization, nonprofit devoted to opening up, promoting free media and open access in a country where that's not really a thing. Media is mostly state-owned there and tightly controlled. And I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the U.S. Embassy in Minsk, which made the whole trip possible and put me up and everything and was very generous to me.
So I got to ask you, like on a high level, like what was it like? I've never been to a country like that.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So, as we talked a little bit before I went, Belarus is situated right between Poland, which is kind of the edge of the European Union, and Russia to its east. And turns out it's kind of more than just the geographical. It's kind of a metaphor in a way for how Belarus is. And, without tipping my hat too much, because we're going to have a future episode coming up that's just devoted entirely to my visit to Minsk and what it's like there and everything. But it's kind of a country that's in limbo a little bit. It's been independent now for 25 years, ever since the fall of the Soviet Union. But like signs of the Soviet past are everywhere, right? I mean, there's a huge monument sculpture to Lenin right in front of the very imposing and intimidating Parliament building right there on Independence Avenue, which is kind of the main drag in town.
That sounds like an architectural time machine.
Yeah, it was a trip for sure. And leading up to my trip, I will say too that it's hard to get a really good, accurate read. I can say this now in hindsight from here in the United States about what Minsk is like. So, I mean, I think we'll be doing some good, and I think the U.S. Embassy, is hoping the same thing by doing a podcast episode about it, because it's hard to get a good, accurate read on what Belarus is all about from here in the United States, right? And frankly, there's a lot to kind of psych yourself out on.
It is the only, I believe it's considered the only authoritarian country in Europe.
This phrase makes Belarusians chafe for sure, but I think it was Condoleezza Rice, the former Secretary of State under George W. Bush, who coined Belarus Europe's last dictatorship.
Wow.
Yeah, which I think a lot of Belarusians think is putting a little bit too strong, but there's no question that the Belarus government, the president, is a strong man. They have had crackdowns in the past on protests. So again, a lot to get psyched out on, and worried about. But I will say that, my hosts were fantastic. They immediately put me at ease. I felt very comfortable for the most part, but, there are still things that you have to be kind of aware of, I was told, don't take photographs of KGB officers. The KGB headquarters is further down Independence Avenue from the Parliament building I talked about, and it's another big, imposing, intimidating building. And I walked by it and kind of furtively took some photographs with my phone. Was told be careful doing this, So it's you do have to be careful and conscious of certain things, but this is all balanced kind of with attributes that you would normally associate with an old Central European capital city, right? So there are beautiful parks everywhere, that ring the it's called the Svislash River in town. There are beautiful buildings, there are wide sidewalks that are brimming with people walking around everywhere, old churches, and interestingly, there are trendy cafes where you can get great pastries and wonderful coffee and croissant and everything, and then there's all these trendy new bars and restaurants opening up all over town. So there's definitely plenty of reason to go there and visit.
Well, I know from looking at downloads of our shows that our listeners would definitely want to hear more about the food.
Yeah, for sure. Food was great. Again, keeping with that European theme. I mean, it's very kind of Eurocentric food. You do see a few falafel stands and things. I heard talk about a Indian restaurant. I mean, I will say diversity, like ethnic diversity, is not one of Minsk's strong suits. I did see some Asian people. I think there are some Chinese people moving in.
Investment, things like that, because
right.
China has definitely been making their presence known across the globe.
For sure. But I think the rest of the time I was there, I saw maybe a couple of like Middle Eastern, people of Middle Eastern descent, and maybe 2 black people, which actually was weird. When I saw them, I was like, oh my God, look at that. Like there's a black person here. That's crazy, But the food was fantastic, including the Belarusian cuisine. I had some, and there were lots of good places to eat. The other thing I will say in Minsk's favor is transit, because this is an issue we talk about a lot here on Daily Detroit. Minsk has, let's see, there are regular conventional like diesel buses. There are electric buses. There are the kind of buses that run on the overhead electric lines, kind of like the Q line. There are streetcar, like trolleys, that also run on the overhead lines. I did not ever ride on those, although I did ride on the bus. But the main thing is Minsk has a fantastically efficient subway system. It's called the Metro. And in English anyway, and it's small. It's 2 lines that make an X, although there's a 3rd line under construction now. But man, Jared, it was amazing. Like I don't think I ever waited longer than 2, maybe 3 minutes for a train to come. Like a lot of these systems in Europe, it is just crazy efficient and reliable. Totally unlike, say, the New York City subway system, which is just plagued by problems nowadays. But, a real glimpse of like what public transit can be,
Well, and Minsk is a Detroit sister city. It's not like they don't like cars there, right?
No, absolutely. So one of the biggest surprises, I think, especially coming from the airport right into the central city, is you're driving on like what is essentially a freeway, and you see wide roads there that don't look unlike what you have here in Metro Detroit. That was a little bit of a surprise for me, and not what you really expect of like an old, nearly 1,000-year-old European city, right? Like you think like narrow streets and more walking, but parts of the city are very, very car centered. Which was interesting.
So we definitely had some transit things going on here while you were gone, specifically the idea that we might do enhanced transit, but without Macomb County. I know that you have some things on that. We did cover it a bit in a previous episode, just the facts, man, for this proposal. But basically, the Wayne, Washtenaw, Oakland, and the city of Detroit working together to start the idea of a tax devoted in their area to do enhanced mass transit.
Right, which you've written about that before. You called it the way to go, right?
Well, the Wayne Washtenaw, because
right.
Yeah, that was an editorial of mine a good year ago where I'm like, you know what? The people who want transit should do it, because trying to convince the ones who don't is just not going to happen after watching it for like 20 years.
Right. And it's clear that, Mark Hackle has no intents of, throwing his support behind this.
He's reading the winds. If there's anything Mark Hackle does, it's go by the winds of popularity.
Sure. I mean, in fairness, I don't think that there is support in Macomb County for, expanded regional transit. And he points out ad infinitum that like, well, we, made the decision to fully fund SMART, the bus system, which, okay, true. And, that voters don't see any need to go any farther than that. Okay, fine. So leave them. This is what we've been talking about on Daily Detroit for a long time. So I like that move. I mean, it's important to note that what is being discussed now is not an actual transit plan. It's really legislation to amend current state law to make it easier for this coalition of the willing, or any coalition in the future, even in another region of the state, to, come together to support a regional transit plan.
Well, it did seem that the idea would be is that this would be another layer on top of, which I'm not a huge fan of more layers, but on the other hand, I know that it's what has to happen. Like there's no way that SMART and DDOT are going to merge. That's just not a thing. And adding almost, I would say like a spine layer, if you would, like something that would, whether it's light rail or probably bus rapid transit, because one of the things in a previous story we were working on I learned that the geometry of so many of our main roads, and that basically means the layout, would have to be completely changed to put light rail in. So I think people should kind of get out the idea that outside of, say, a corridor to the airport or something on existing lines, that we're going to have light rail. I don't think that's going to happen.
No, I think so too. I mean, even when I was in Minsk, people, I mentioned that there's a third subway line under construction, and then I heard some people talking about how they thought it would be a more cost effective to invest in like bus rapid transit, like the same thing we're talking about. But, Minsk also showed that, people say, well, we have issues with our, it's not a perfect transit system here, but it sure seemed to work pretty well for me. I mean, I rode the bus as well. I even it was a licensed kind of taxi van service one day. So it's not a taxi cab, but it's a van type of thing. So it's an easy city to get around. And I mean, it just shows you like what it's like to live in a city with robust public transit. Like I used cars a couple times, but generally speaking, like it was a very easy place to get around on foot, subway, bus, etc. And I mean, that's what we don't have here.
Well, I think that people who are not for more transit in Metro Detroit, I think a lot of times they miss the forest through the trees on it, because while you were gone, I had a couple of different conversations with folks who are right now shopping for places in other regions because they're just simply like, there's no way to get around. You have to get in the car all the time. And if you want to live in the city, and this is something that actually we touched on while you were gone as well, the high cost of car insurance and the fact that it is not coming down anytime soon.
Right.
That was actually a decision factor for people saying, all right, this is not going to happen. We're not going to get any real savings. I'm out.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm living without a car right now as well. My family, we have one car, which, for me during the days, I can make it work. It's not too bad. I can, because I can work wherever. I work here, which is right off the bus line. And Cheyenne, of course, operates the Schuber, which is very helpful.
She engineers and operates the Schuber. It's all things.
But, after working hours when the kids have, competing after school activities and things like that, my wife has to leave for class. It gets really challenging, no question about it. So this is a good step. I think, coming back to the new regional transit authority sort of legislation, which again is not a transit plan per se, but it paves the way for it, hopefully as soon as next November. I think the really interesting thing is I read that the legislation, the central legislation, is being proposed by a Republican, which is encouraging because, Republicans control both the state house and the state Senate. I don't know what the kind of will is up there in Lansing right now to like open this up and do a favor for Detroit. A lot of the Detroit area state lawmakers are probably not big supporters of expanding regional transit, authority. They're from places like northern Oakland County and stuff, which, kind of howled, and generally didn't support the RTA the last time it came before voters. But it's also interesting, this is coming as Dave Coulter is the brand new Oakland County executive taking over for L. Brooks Patterson, who of course was, famously lukewarm to public transit and failed to, really do much to try and
and some would argue that he actually, in his own way, got in the way.
Yeah, like sabotaged it in a way. I mean, well, he did the last time and failed to, he and Mark Hackle basically prevented it from getting to the ballot. It's interesting that, the support is, Coulter's a major supporter going back to the time when he was the Ferndale mayor, and even before that on the Oakland County Board of Commissioners, huge supporter of transit. So the RTA in 2016 lost in Oakland County by like 1,100 votes, I think, very slim majorities. Oakland County is eminently swingable, and especially I think this legislation, correct me if I'm wrong, would mean it's not a county by county. Like in other words,
it's a zone. Well, it's
an overall vote count.
Right, it makes it one big zone. Yeah.
Yeah. So in other words, like, Washtenaw, Wayne, and Oakland, not all three of those counties need to approve it for it to go forward, or would need to approve it.
Right. Well, and Wayne County's starting to see growth as well because you've got a large immigrant population that's moving into Wayne County now. There was a report that came out about all of that. And that's really going to start to change the balance of power in the region, especially if you see both Oakland and Wayne starting to add or at least stay even with people and not see as much go towards Macomb County. So let's keep on the idea of mobility, if you will, that terrible buzzword. Specifically, that thing called the Cybertruck.
Yes,
I can't. Yes. I mean, I know people who have already pre-ordered this thing. There are apparently 250,000 pre-orders for this bad boy. Now, those pre-orders are only putting $100 down. So,
Yeah,
I mean, that's not a huge
and it's
sign.
And it's according to Elon Musk, which I think it's always sort of a good idea to.
I think Elon Musk and Donald Trump went to the same math class.
Oh, totally. I mean, so I was going to say, I think it's always a good idea to take whatever he says with a decent sized grain of salt. I think history has sort of borne that out. But this was, and I was watching this, because I do some auto writing on the side, as I've always said, and I probably would have been in Los Angeles covering the auto show last week had I not gone to Belarus. I had a better offer, frankly, go to Belarus.
You would have seen the metal ball for
I
yourself.
I prefer Minsk in November to Los Angeles.
Minsk versus Musk.
But I certainly kept close watch to this, and it was pretty funny and entertaining to sort of gauge reaction. I wasn't really watching it in real time, but short. The reveal came out at night, and I think I'm trying to do the calculations. The Minsk is 8 hours ahead of us here in Detroit and 11 hours ahead of LA. So it was like early morning, I think, when I
basically the flip side of the world.
Yeah. It was like early morning when I was seeing this, and much of the press activity in the press was going to bed in the United States as this reveal was, kind of trickling down and the reveal was ending. And people were like sort of like speechless. Like they were just like, oh my God, is this real? Is he pranking us again? I mean, it's Elon Musk. He's famous for sort of pranks and jokes and stuff. And people were kind of like, this is real, the Cybertruck? So, I mean, if you haven't seen it, of course, everybody has by now, right? It looks like the most obvious is like the DeLorean, right? Because the thing is stainless steel, heavy on angles. Like it's
very heavy on angles. It kind of looks like some of the cars in video games they used to play back like in the 80s.
Yeah, totally. It has a very much like retro kind of like 8-bit video game.
Yeah, you know what it looks like? It looks like the DeLorean in a Nintendo game.
Yeah. Look, I personally can't say that I love the design. I think it's just weird looking.
I feel like there's a lot of debate about this design, whether people either love it or they hate it. I find that people who are younger tend to love it, and people who are a little bit older tend to hate it.
Yeah, well, I can't. Oh, one of the other priceless comparisons that I heard to it was the Pontiac Aztek.
The Aztek was,
which you have to go back to like the early 2000s, I think, when that came out, and under the now defunct Pontiac label.
In my old neighborhood, you could always tell who worked for GM because they all had Azteks in their driveway because they got them dirt cheap.
Yeah, and I mean the Aztek is widely cited as one of the ugliest automobiles ever.
Eminently practical, very practical, good for camping.
Sure. What's the name of the main character in Breaking Bad? He drove an Aztek.
Oh yeah,
Walter. Anyway, the character played by Bryan Cranston.
Yeah.
Anyway, look, I don't think that the Cybertruck personally, it's not my taste. Okay. But my, I guess 2 cents about this is that I think this probably will be a hit. I likened it to, I think it's going to become like the Hummer of the Silicon Valley set. You know what I mean? Like a totally unnecessary, sort of a vanity buy for people with money and, technical know-how and everything like that.
I would love to see the Venn diagram of previous Tesla owners and Cybertruck pre-orders.
Yeah, for sure. I think, there's probably heavy overlap there. And I mean, it's going to be people that like have never driven a pickup truck before, right? Because this thing is so unlike what we normally think of as pickup trucks. In fact, I saw a really interesting article where they were interviewing a couple of big name country music artists to ask them what they thought about the truck. And one of the quotes that was really good, "This is not the kind of pickup truck that screams country music." Which also brings me to my other point that like outside of like this kind of like niche segment of auto buyers, like I don't know who's going to spring for this thing. I mean, it's competitively priced, sure, and it's got like very impressive specs. Its hauling capacity is up to like 14,000 pounds and everything. But people don't generally. A lot of pickup truck buyers don't, like, rarely, if ever, haul anything. First of all, and I just don't see a lot of like the core pickup truck demographic. People who buy Ram and Chevy Silverado and the F-150,
which are the
Ford.
cash cows for these automakers. This is why they're doing it. This is why they're doing a pickup truck.
Those are the big, that's everybody aspires to be on those the same level as those trucks, right? But I just don't see people who buy those kind of trucks switching. Like, it's just such a radically different truck, and aesthetically, especially, I'm sorry, like, good old boys driving pickup trucks are not going to buy Cybertrucks.
See, and I wonder if this is like a counterculture play. The idea being like, all right, well, if you're not actually somebody who's hauling stuff, or is it, do you want to look like you're hauling stuff? Because a big part of car buying is not what you actually need. It's what you want to portray that you actually need.
Yeah. Well, and the Cybertruck also doesn't look like a pickup truck, which is fine. But I mean, it has a cover over the bed. Like, it looks more like
you know what it reminds me of?
It looks like a moon shuttle, frankly. More
a
than
DeLorean and El Camino had a baby.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I mean, it's weird. It's polarizing, clearly. People are talking about it, though, as, I mean, we haven't even mentioned yet the tug of war stunt that
I was just about to go there. Yeah.
That Elon Musk did with the F-150. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the famous, astrophysicist, weighed in on this and pointed out, look, this is a ridiculous comparison. It's all about the weight. Clearly, the Cybertruck is far heavier than this F-150. Ford, at one point, one of the engineers,
Sonny Madra, I've talked to him before.
Yeah, he apparently signaled a willingness to well, if you let us pick a more comparable F-150, we'd be interested in doing it again. I think Ford's backed off.
They've already,
then.
I was going to mention that.
Which,
Ford backed up.
I don't
PR
blame them. This is.
But
just,
people want to see it. People would love to see it.
But it's more about that's true. But it's also more about Elon Musk scoring free PR points and keeping this in front of everybody. I think one of the interesting points is Elon Musk has even acknowledged that the Cybertruck in its current form is going to present a number of challenges just from the manufacturing aspect of it, because it's all stainless steel, you can't stamp it and stuff. It's going to change between now and production, just how much. And remember, this thing's a few years away from actually hitting the streets.
Well, he said that production will start sometime in 2021.
Yeah, well, it was just 2 years away.
Right. But as we all know, it can be, but on the other hand, I mean, Musk has had some success in that electric space.
For sure.
Those Teslas are moving, and they are basically the segment leader right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like I said, this kind of echoes what I mentioned earlier, but I think my friend Nathan Bomey, he's been on this show before. He put it really well in a tweet. He said, there's no question that this will find a niche audience, but the question is, can Tesla afford to put something out that's niche? This is going to cost them a lot of money. I'm sure it's already cost them a lot of money to develop this car, and they need to sell in high volumes to turn the corner and become sustainably profitable. And is this the truck? Is this the vehicle to do it? That's the big question.
Well, sticking with the auto industry, there is more drama around town.
Oh my God.
Because first you've got, well, I don't know exactly how the order to present this, but basically you've got Fiat Chrysler that's going to be merging together with PSA. That tie-up's kind of starting to come together.
Yep.
And then you have General Motors suing Fiat Chrysler. And in some ways it's because of a failed tie-up with them a few years ago, back in 2015. A bunch of stuff alleged that Chrysler, did to try to manipulate the talks. This is all, of course, allegations from GM, who's suing them for an unnamed billions of dollars. It's basically somebody went ahead and got Jerry Springer and brought him to Detroit.
Yeah, this was crazy. I saw this break, again, last week when I was in Belarus, and I was telling oh my God, GM just sued Fiat Chrysler, and people there were like, what happened? We didn't hear about, I forget, I'm halfway around the world and people aren't paying close attention to the auto industry over there.
Did you ever see any American cars there? Total sidebar.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, you see Fords, you see definitely a lot of,
are they modern models, or are they late models?
No, they're mostly modern. I mean, I saw a lot of them, especially when I had a layover in Frankfurt, and I saw a lot there buzzing around the airport, especially in form of taxis and things like that. Ford wagons, the kinds they don't sell here. But sure, yeah, you see for American vehicles over there. A lot of European brands though, like Skoda and Peugeot, part of the PSA group. Opel also, that you don't see here, at least not yet. But anyway, so Yeah, crazy lawsuit. This all kind of stems from the ongoing corruption investigation into the United Auto Workers Union, which also kind of relates to Fiat Chrysler, right? Because there have been, I think, 3 convictions already of former Fiat Chrysler executives for alleged, bribe for convictions on bribes and kickbacks and things like that to UAW members. In fact, GM has apparently used a lot of what the prosecutors' findings in these cases to build their own case against Fiat Chrysler, and they're basically bringing forward. This is a racketeering lawsuit. It's a RICO lawsuit, which I've been reading a little bit about. Like legal experts are saying these are very difficult cases to prove and to win in court of law. I mean, they essentially GM is essentially going to have to prove that Fiat Chrysler's actions caused us to lose money. We would have made more money had they not done these things, which is always a difficult thing to prove. It also comes as, again, you mentioned Fiat Chrysler is pursuing a merger with PSA Group from France. That's the parent group of Peugeot, Opel, a bunch of other brands. And I think I saw that deal could be imminent. They are very eager, both sides, to
make that happen,
to sign the deal. And it also, again, comes, as Fiat Chrysler is embroiled in this wider corruption investigation, mostly targeting UAW. And then finally, Fiat Chrysler is negotiating right now with the UAW on a new 4-year contract.
And that's ongoing. And there's various distractions because you've got the president, Gary Jones. Sorry.
Resigned.
Gary Johnson was the failed libertarian candidate for president.
Not him.
Gary Jones resigned.
Yep. Because he's been implicated in this whole corruption investigation.
And then they're dealing with Vance Pearson as well. He was at the courthouse. The UAW has a lot on their plate. In fact, we got a statement from their communications folks saying that, reinforcing that they are focused on, the negotiations.
Yeah.
It always reminds me, it's oh, okay, you really feel like you need to calm people down.
Well, it's incredible, all of this stuff going on simultaneously. I mean, the UAW has managed to strike a deal, obviously with GM following the 40-day strike. That was bitterly contested negotiations. They got a new contract with Ford already. That went through with relatively with relatively few bumps in the road. Wow, it's amazing that they've been able to get all this business done at the same time that the very union's integrity is under question by this ongoing investigation.
Well, and it's even more interesting because a lot of the so-called issues are ones that have to do with Chrysler, and that's who they're negotiating with right now. And Chrysler is in a very different financial position, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the future, especially with this merger. There are things that they're working on for next generation mobility, but they're not in the same position that GM and Ford are going down the line.
They are considerably behind, I'd say, both GM and Ford in terms of developing electric vehicles. Ford, we just saw them debut the new Mustang Mach-E. You talked about it.
Had your buddy Greg on there?
Yep, Greg Migliori from Autoblog. And, GM has, of course, the Chevy Bolt. They've had the Chevrolet Volt for many years, which is technically kind of a plug-in hybrid, technically. But, they've got a little bit more experience, both of those companies, with electric vehicles currently on the road than Fiat Chrysler is, which really doesn't have anything. It's had some hybrids. But yeah, they, and that's one of the things I think they're hoping to kind of get stronger at with this tie-up with PSA Group. Going back to the lawsuit, I mean, GM is basically alleging that through all these kickbacks, both alleged and proven through convictions and embezzlement and everything, that they've basically gotten the UAW to agree to certain concessions that have tilted the playing field unfairly in Fiat Chrysler's behalf, right? Fiat Chrysler's labor costs are lower. They've been able to hire more temporary workers and more lower tier paid full-time employees than either GM or Ford. I mean, in this case, it's GM raising the complaints, not Ford, but nonetheless, I read that some analysts think that at the end of the day, GM could be seeking as much as $14 billion from Fiat Chrysler.
That just sounds like silly season.
Well, it does, but it's also, and we're a long way away from, I think, taking that number seriously in some ways. I mean, there's clearly this is not going to be resolved anytime soon. But I mean, if that came to pass, that would be huge for any company. I mean, and it could, frankly, I think, Fiat Chrysler is worried that this could, or was maybe even intentionally designed to blow up their merger with PSA Group.
Which I don't think it's going to do.
Probably not, but, there could be more shoes to drop. Who knows?
And one more thing I wanted to talk about before we go. I know that some of our audience is interested in this. Legal pot sales start Sunday.
That's right. That's apparently the first day that some of the businesses have been open. I think most of them around here, the closest you're going to find any businesses to go and buy legal recreational weed are in Ann Arbor. There was one other small town, I forget, that got one of the first batch of licenses. It's not top of mind right now, but that's the closest to the Detroit area anyway. I think most of the hopefuls around in Detroit. Detroit's still kind of in
it's
freeze.
in a limbo, right? So what's going on?
Probably not until early next year at the earliest.
Right, because what they wanted to do
in the city of Detroit.
Yeah, in the city of Detroit, at least according to Councilman James Tate, his whole idea was to basically put a hold on things for a little while, get their arms around what's happening. I think that a lot of Detroiters, not all, but there is a large section of Detroit residents who feel like when marijuana got legal for medical purposes the first time, a lot of places, it was a rash of places that opened, and they didn't feel like, it kind of felt like it was the Wild West.
Yeah.
So there's definitely this feeling of, okay, let's do this with a little bit more measure this time. Although he definitely got lambasted online because all the headlines say, and most people just scan headlines nowadays.
Right. True.
Right. And they just say, well, there's going to be no pot sales.
Detroit's not going to allow any recreational marijuana business.
Right. And that gets the clicks and the shares. But in reality, the whole plan was, let's take a mother may I step back, because this all happened rather quickly.
Yeah. Well, it did and it didn't. But so it's going to be a little while until Detroit presumably, opens the doors to legal recreational weed. Quick little aside before we let our listeners go here, though. When I was in Belarus, I on the ride in from the airport, I noticed that there were these green cross signs outside of businesses, right?
Huh.
So I asked my host, I said, what are those? Just curious. Oh, those are pharmacies. And I said, just like regular drug pharmacies, right? And they said, yeah. And so, and I explained, I said, well, okay, back in Detroit, if you see a sign like that, a green neon cross sign, that means it's a medical marijuana dispensary. And they laughed. Oh, no, not here, man. In Belarus, it's apparently deadly serious felony if you're caught with even small amounts of marijuana, and it brings apparently an automatic, fairly long prison sentence. So not something to mess around with when you're traveling overseas in Belarus, comrades.
Well, that'll do it for today's show. A quick reminder that Small Business Saturday is this weekend. Go check out some of your local businesses, wherever you may be, whether you're in Detroit, Ferndale, out there in the outburbs, Northville. There's all kinds, Rochester, there's all kinds of Dearborn, there's all kinds of great small businesses to check out, and Small Business Saturday is the day to do it.
Yeah, the great thing is, while Amazon is pretty fast about delivering your packages, you can go to a store and come home with it already. There it is.
What they should do is they should brand that as some sort of instant delivery.
Yeah, no doubt.
And of course, I would be remiss to not do the simple ask that if you are so inclined, being a member really does help keep things going here at Daily Detroit. I know today's episode was more of a catch-up between two old friends and the stories that were happening around town, but really, we're working on some really great stories.
Independent media requires independent support, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can join Matt, Halima, Ann, Alan, and many others at patreon.com/Daily Detroit. And thank you. With that, I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Sven Gustafson. Glad to be back, everybody. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Take care of each other, and we'll see you around Detroit.